Number 12, Recursion by Blake Crouch. Now, I'm a fantasy sci-fi reader, but I find that I'm more of a fantasy reader because a lot of the sci-fi books are either too sciencey for me, or doesn't make sense to me, or feel forced to me. And I'm definitely a lot more careful in terms of reading sci-fi books because I don't want to get lost. Like, a lot of science fiction books, they sound a little convoluted, so I'm like, no, I don't think that's up my alley. And some books sound so interesting, but the execution is very confusing to me. I'm not a very scientific person. I like things to make sense to me. Like, even though, it's physics or it's whatever form of science it is, if it is explained well in the story and by the characters, and, things make sense in terms of, if I start thinking philosophically, there would be like a scientific like explanation for it. Oh yeah, I'm down for that because, as you read science fiction books, as I read science fiction books, I get like these questions in my head, but what about this? How about this? But if it happens like this, shouldn't things happen like this? I need answers for that as I read the books. Like, not direct answers, but as, the people go through, or as we go through the story, I would definitely like get answers from there, like deduce from the different things happening. Anyway, that's why I'm very afraid of science fiction books, because as much as I love a good science fiction book, when I read a science fiction book that I love, and I'm all for it, definitely. Like, it's either I love it or I don't, So, Blake Crouch, Recursion. I read Dark Matter. Oh, before I get into Recursion, Dark Matter, let's talk about Dark Matter. Let me see. Dark Matter. Dark Matter is also part of my top 20 books for this year. In that series, we're following the character, I forgot his name, but he's a professor. He wakes up one day in this kind of different world where his wife is not his wife. His son isn't alive. He is not a professor. He owns like a very big, I don't know if it's a company or like a research facility. It's like he had two different choices back then. Either marry the wife that he knew he married, or choose this research where it might lead him to be very, very successful in the scientific world. And so the professor that he was chose to marry the wife that he had. And so he wakes up in this world where his wife is not his wife again, and he realizes that this is his character, this is him if he had chosen the other path. And so it's the question of different decisions that you can make and how your path converges in different ways, or splits in different ways as you make different decisions that will lead you to different outcomes in your life. It's the story of that idea. And so he tries to go back to his life and figure out what happens, who did this, like how did he come back, how did he go to this life instead, and what happens to that life that he had. So that was very interesting to me too, another top book. And so when I heard about Recursion, of course, I was like, yes, sign me up, especially because here we're following now I think a police officer or a detective who investigates this false memory syndrome that's happening to people. It's kind of similar to Dark Matter, but in here people are starting to remember memories of a different life that they could have had. And for some of these people, it gets very depressing because you experience or remember these other memories that could have led you to that could have been the life that you're living if you've made a different decision back then. It's kind of like Dark Matter again. So a lot of people are going either crazy or committing suicide because of these memories that they have, and kind of, of course it ruins a lot of people's lives, because sometimes, the person that you marry in this false memory syndrome might be a different person that you marry now, and sometimes what you remember is a much better marriage experience, so definitely very interesting. And again, we go back and forth in time, and some memories are shorter than the others, or his life ends a little bit faster than the others. So again, very interesting take. It didn't make me confused, which is a big thing. I understood, I want to say, all of the things that were happening, maybe like 90% what was happening. Definitely didn't make me any confused. Didn't make me like so confused and so like, what? Okay, whatever, I'm just gonna keep reading because I really enjoy these characters, and the characters are very interesting as well. But I feel like it's more of like the whole scientific philosophical maybe idea. So again, Blake Crouch. So I definitely do want to read more of Blake Crouch books, especially her Wayward Pine series and all the other books that he might be coming out. this year as well, or throughout the years. A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. Now, this is another book that is very hard to rate because it's such an emotional book. In terms of the writing, I think the writing is really good because this is a middle grade book and we're following, got his name, but we're following him as he gets visited by this monster and tells him different stories every night. And the stories are not the usual, kid stories where there's a moral at the end of the story character, and it's not always like black and white. And we explore these stories and how it relates to this kid and what happens at the end of the fourth story, and why is this kid being visited by this monster. And it's very emotional. And I also watched the movie, and it's an interesting take on the story or on the experiences of a 9-year-old kid in terms of death and the pain of losing people from his lives, and the way the people around him, their actions affect him and how he interprets it. And as a kid, they don't really understand like exactly what is happening or why people are doing these things. And sometimes in their heads it's either a friend or an enemy. It's a black and white kind of thing for them. So such a very interesting take. Again, very emotional, hard to rate, but this is one book, one of those books that I feel like everybody should read. It's very short. I think it's like 150 pages or maybe like 250 pages. Very, very short. Okay. Next one, another book by Shannon McGuire, Middlegame. Now, Middlegame is an adult fantasy book. We're following twins, Roger and another R. I forgot her name, but they're twins, and they didn't grow up together. They didn't know they were twins, but one day they started to send messages to each other, talk to each other in their heads. And Roger is really good with words and linguistics, and his twin, his sister, is really good with numbers. And so following their story and how is it that they're able to talk to each other, why they're so different from each other, and why they didn't grow up with, and the roles that other people might have had in their creation and stuff. And so it's a lot of things too, and such a fun read. It is a standalone, and usually fantasy standalones are not my type of jam because I prefer my fantasies to be long and we're following a lot of different characters. But I really enjoyed reading this book. Obviously, excuse me. Anyway, moving on. Let's go through this. We're almost done. We're following their story and like the intricacies of their birth and how they were conceived and they were born and why they're so opposites of each other. And yeah, it's really, really good. The writing again is very good. I think I'd put down like a really good, put down only one quote really, but as I read the book I was like, oh, these are quotable quotes, so yeah. Middlegame. I'm losing my voice. Okay, the next book is a book that is either my number one book that I want to read for 2019-ish, or like one of the top books that I want to read for 2019. That is this humongous standalone fantasy by Samantha Shannon, Priory of the Orange Tree. This is about dragons, and I don't really have a lot of things to say about this because when I read this book I was a little bit out of it. I think it was around that time that my reading I went into a reading slump, and as much as I really enjoyed this book and really love the characters and stuff, it's like not, sorry, I'm seeing stuff on my phone. Anyway, what was I saying? I felt like I would have remembered them like a lot more if I was a little bit more present or more present when I read this book. It's not because I didn't like this book, it's just that I was just going through a slump, and it's one of those. No matter how good a book is, sometimes if you're in a slump, you're in a slump. But I still really enjoyed reading this book. The world is very interesting. We're following here two kind of different cultures in terms of how they regard dragons. Now here in the story, we have a group of people who are training to be dragon riders, and we're also following kind of the prophecy of when this really evil, this enemy dragon. Let me see if I have a world divided, a queendom without an heir. Oh yeah, that's one of the things here too. There's a queendom here. An ancient enemy awakens. That's it. An ancient enemy awakens. The House of Birthland has ruled Innis for 1,000 years. Still unwed, Queen Sabran the Ninth must conceive a daughter to protect her realm from destruction, but assassins are getting closer to her door. Now here the story, Queen Sabran is like the prophesized, the line of Queen Sabran is prophesized to keep the whole world safe from this dragon. The enemy that that is mentioned here is a dragon that tried to destroy their world. Now it is prophesized that as long as they have an heir or there is Barathnet on the throne, this dragon will stay asleep and will not wake up, and they will be safe. Durian is an outsider at court. Though she has risen to the position of lady-in-waiting, she is loyal to a hidden society of mages. He keeps a watchful eye on Sabran, secretly protecting her with forbidden magic. Across the Dark Sea, Tane has trained to be a dragon rider since she was a child, but she is forced to make a choice that could see her life unravel. Meanwhile, the divided East and West refuse to parley, and forces of chaos are rising from their sleep. So we're following these different characters who have these different roles in protecting the world and different roles in relations to these dragons and protecting the world. So very interesting. We're following different cultures in this fantasy world, and again, such a beautiful writing from Samantha Shannon. Samantha Shannon is the author of the Bone Season. I have read the first book years ago, around the time it first came out, and then the next 3 books came out, and I thought it was just a trilogy, and when I realized it was 6 books in this series, and we're still not sure when the next 3 books are coming out, or maybe I needed to read something from Samantha Shannon because I remember really loving the Bone Season. Alright, my voice hurts. My throat hurts. I need to stop talking, but here we are. Okay, the next book is another book that is definitely a 5 stars, but this is a reread for me. This is Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli. I read this years ago. This is my favorite book of all time. And we follow here Stargirl, who moves into this small town in Arizona, and she's very different. She's been homeschooled for most of her life, if not all her life, and so she has a very quirky attitude and quirky personality. She's very different. And in the high school that she goes to, they're very cliquey. They stick to the status quo. They have certain people that do certain things, and they stay in their boxes. And so when Stargirl comes into this school and she kind of shakes up this whole hierarchy, she's met with a lot of hostility, but eventually people realize, how constricted they are, and they start loving her. But because she is watched by a lot of people, when she does something that they don't really approve of or they don't really like, she gets shunned again. And we're also here following Leo, who is Stargirl's love interest, and how it affects him and how he sees it on his perspective, as part of this status quo-y culture, but also knowing that they're being very status quo-y, and it's very restrictive. And when I first read it, I resonated largely and pretty much only with Stargirl. I felt like a Stargirl when I was younger. I have had this very different thoughts and not so popular likes and interests, and I've just always felt very misunderstood and alone. And I resonated definitely with Stargirl, but rereading it, I definitely resonated with the people around Stargirl as well, which is very sad. As I grew up, I realized I definitely kind of toned down my Stargirliness. It's a weird thing to say, but as you grow up, you become different from where you were before, and sometimes you just either realize you're either fighting a little too hard or trying to be a little too unique because you didn't want people to set you in a certain standard, or try to set you in a certain place. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with being like everybody else, and sometimes, I don't know, it's about the world really question where you are in life now and what you've been doing for the rest of your life and how you're reacting and what what you're doing. Sometimes you just need to step back and maybe think through what it is that you're doing and if it feels true to you or not. And sometimes it can be very different from what people want or need, or it might be exactly what people expect, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with sticking to a certain status quo and maybe being a little bit different from the status quo, as long as it feels right to you and you're not hurting anybody or you're not stepping on other people's toes. Do you. Yeah. So that was a very emotional read for me, especially when I realized how much I resonated with other people too, because I've always thought of myself as more of a Stargirl kind of person, where I feel very different and not part of other people's expectations. But at the same time, now I understand where these people are coming from, so yeah, I definitely had to take a step back from reading that book halfway through because of that realization. It made me very emotional. Okay, next, Five Dark Fates by Kendare Blake. This is the last book in the Three Dark Crowns series. I've been waiting for this, I feel like, for such a long time, because the third book, when I read it, was not what I expected. I didn't love it as much as I loved the first 2 books. I felt like it was unnecessary. Like things that happened in that book could have been summarized or like made into something else and added either to the second book or maybe the fourth book, and the third book could have been completely gone. I initially thought that this was going to be a trilogy, and then I realized it was going to be a quartet, but I think they just turned it into a quartet because a lot of people love it, so they wanted, to add a little bit more book to the series. I don't know if that's what happened, or maybe I just thought, usually fantasy series are in trilogies. Anyway, here we're following the story of three sisters, they're triplets, who grew up as heirs to this queendom. And here, ultimately, how they're going to acquire, how one of them is going to acquire the throne is by killing the other two twins. Now, usually these twins have different powers from each other. One is usually a poisoner, and the poisoner clan has been the ruler for years. We also have a naturalist, which is in tune with animals and plants and nature. And the other one is an elementalist, who can control the 4 different elements and can control the weather. So we're following these 3 different sisters and how complicated it can get in terms of fighting each other, because they didn't grow up separately all their lives. When they turned 6, that's when they separated and went to their own clans where their powers can be like cultivated. Anyway, that's the main premise of the series here, and it gets, of course, a lot more complicated than that because there's a lot of history in this country. The country is separated from the rest of the world, where this is pretty much the only country with powers, but they are not heavily known, or they don't have like very heavy relationships with other countries. They're definitely trades, but they're still very secluded and very separate from the rest of the world. So there's a lot of deep history, like how did the whole like triplets happen, and like it's always like that. The queen will always have triplets, and once she gets the triplets, she can either abdicate or she's going to die quite soon. That's how it is. And so the next one who gets into the throne is also going to get triplets, all girls, and it's going to be the same. They're going to grow up, they're going to kill each other, and this cycle goes. That's the whole story. And the history between that and what has happened to other queens as well. Has the country always been like separate from other countries? How did that become so? The sources of their magic and stuff. And we're just gonna be, we just explored the whole thing there. And I really enjoyed this last book. Again, compared to the third book, I felt like the third book was quite unnecessary. I felt like we definitely got a really good ending for everyone. So yeah, it's still very brutal, by the way. This whole series is very brutal and quite morbid in terms of what happens to other people here. So moving on, my tattoo itches and it's scabbing and I want to pick at it, I want to scratch it, but I'm not allowed to. It's so itchy. Okay, moving on. We're almost there. Winter of the Witch by Katherine and Arden. Now this is the last book in the, I forgot the series it's called, but it's a Russian kind of fantasy series. We're following Vasya, who can see these like mythical creatures around her, and she grows up in this country place in Russia. Her mother dies, and it was her mother who really kind of showed her how to treat these like gods, these creatures, and how they have to be very careful. They have to like give gifts and acknowledge the presence and offer some things to these creatures so that they can help protect and guide their family that's living in certain houses or areas. And we're seeing also the changes in cultures, because people believe in these like mythical creatures, gods and goddesses, but then with the movement of religion and people are realizing that, oh, maybe these are not real and these are just like part of the culture and stuff. And so it changes their dynamic, and her father marries a woman who is very religious, who sets about these changes in the household and stuff, and she does not allow these like superstitious beliefs and practices to run through, and it puts a lot of them in danger. And so as the only one who can see these creatures now, she works to hide this ability better so that she can keep like helping and being helped by these creatures. And it gets a lot more complicated than that, obviously, and I really loved her character and the whole story and the mythology. I really enjoyed, and the magic. And yeah, it's just a very beautiful retelling-ish of a take on Russian mythology and Russian fairy tales. I don't know much about them, but I really enjoyed this book, this series. So this final book It's definitely, I want to say it's a trilogy, right? So my first book is definitely my favorite. The second book, not so much. It's my least favorite out of all the three. And then this is going to be my second favorite from the whole series. So yeah, do you notice how tired I am? I'm very tired. I want to stop talking. Okay, the last book in this series is the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series by Laini Taylor. Now, I read the first book years ago around the time it came out. Around the time the second book hasn't been out yet, or was just about to come out, and then the third book we didn't have any dates for, and a lot of people were afraid that it might take more than a year before this comes out. So again, because I love binge reading series, I did not read this until this year, and this was released 2013, 2012. And so I remember really loving this book, and I feel like Daughter Smoke and Bone was like my main introduction to like a truer fantasy series, because back then the fantasy series that we had was Twilight, and that was more of an urban fantasy. Here it's like a complete fantasy like series book, and so it was such an experience for me. And you're introduced to these mythical creatures, to magic, to these characters, to this completely different world. I just fell in love with it, and the writing too is so beautiful and captivating. It just entrances you. And so I've been wanting to read this book, especially because throughout the years it's just garnered a really big following, and it's hyped up by people. A lot of people love it. They love Laini Taylor's writing. She came out with Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. That should be here too. Did I read that this year? I think I read those this year. So I guess I have 21 favorites. Strange the Dreamer. No, I like Strange the Dreamer. Probably one of my top books as well. But this series, I will say, when I reread the first book, because I had to reread the first book. It was years after, it was years when I first read that book. I didn't feel as intensely as I did the first time that I read it, which is understandable. Again, this is probably like my first foray into like true fantasy. So when I first read it, it was very interesting, and it was very different from me. It's very eye-opening to me. So when I reread this, I still love it. I still love Laini Taylor's writing. It just felt a little too fast for me. And a little too forced in terms of the like the relationships. And I definitely wanted to learn more about the book. And there is war that we're focused on, like that's the main thing in this series. But I wanted a little bit more of what we're fighting for. And I see these people who have had these like really good relationships with each other, and how they grew up and their culture. But I wanted to learn more about their culture, about their world. Definitely the world that they were in is now gone, because they've been pretty much eradicated. But I don't know, just wanted to learn a little bit more in terms of who they are and what they do, and their cultures and their traditions and them as people. So that was what I lacked from this book. We're definitely a lot more focused in the main characters and their relationships, which I completely understand. I did like their relationship, but in the beginning especially, it felt a little too forced and a little too fast, and I wanted to learn more about the histories and the backstories. So yeah, so I guess this is more of a top 19 books, and that one is more of a what was it, something mentioned, I forgot the term. My brain's not working anymore. I've been filming for an hour. Amazing. So yeah, those are my top books for 2019. I hope you guys have heard of these books as well, and if you guys have been thinking about reading some of these books, I hope I got to convince you to read them too. And yeah, if you guys read these books as well, if you disagree with what I said about these books, tell me down below. Let's have a discussion. So yeah, I'm tired. I want to stop talking. I don't have words anymore. So it's very raw. Yeah, and I will see you on my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.